Picture the scenario. You're walking into a room full of your peers.
Oh, yeah, the classic setup.
Right. Maybe it's a networking event or a family gathering or just the first day of a brand new endeavor.
Exactly.
And on the surface, you look like you've completely nailed it. I mean, your outfit is put together, you're holding a cup of coffee with this super relaxed grip.
You've got the posture down?
Yeah, exactly. You're offering these polite, perfectly socially acceptable smiles to everyone who makes eye contact. But internally,
Oh, internally is a whole different story.
it's chaos. Your mind is just racing at an absolute 100 miles an hour. You feel like this total fraud who is, about to be unmasked at any second.
Like everyone is onto you.
Yes. And you're completely exhausted from spending the last week saying yes to things you absolutely hate doing just to keep the people around you happy.
Which is so common.
It really is. And with the sickening sense of certainty that later tonight you're going to be lying in bed staring at the ceiling.
Replaying the entire night.
Every single awkward micro-interaction, just replaying it in your head. And while you're doing that, you'll probably be mindlessly scrolling through social media.
Making it even worse.
Right, because you're secretly resenting all those people on your screen who just seem to have this whole life thing effortlessly figured out. It's just a profoundly exhausting way to live.
It really is.
Yeah.
And that invisible reality is quietly consuming so many people right now.
Yeah.
What you just described is essentially the modern human condition distilled into a single evening.
Wow. Yeah, that's spot on.
We're living in this era where we are surrounded by endless opportunities for connection, right? Yet we feel more profoundly isolated than ever before.
It's a huge paradox. We have all the tools.
Exactly. We've downloaded every productivity app, we've read all the self-improvement advice, yet we find ourselves completely burned out. And it's just from the sheer effort of managing our own internal monologue.
Yeah, the mental gymnastics.
We are constantly trying to curate our external reality while our internal reality is slowly falling apart under all that pressure.
And that tension is exactly the challenge we're facing today. Why do we consistently sabotage our own peace of mind like this?
That's a great question.
Why does this completely natural biological desire to just connect with other people, to be seen, to succeed, constantly morph into this toxic brew of self-loathing and social anxiety?
And total burnout.
Right. It genuinely feels like our own brains have been wired to actively prevent our happiness.
Well, the thing to remember is that the human brain is a survival machine, not a happiness machine.
Oh, wow. A survival machine.
Yeah. And our mission today is to unpack a wealth of psychological insights that can help you completely dismantle these mental traps.
I love that.
We're going to explore how you can fundamentally rewire your entire approach to social connection. We're going to look at the actual mechanics of how to tame that incredibly harsh internal critic you carry around in your head.
Which we all have.
Absolutely. And perhaps most fundamentally, we're going to redefine what it actually means to take care of yourself.
Right, moving past the bubble baths.
It's exactly. Moving far beyond the highly commercialized, superficial ideas of what self-care is supposed to look like in the modern world.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with one of the most insidious and toxic traps of all, which is comparison.
Well, comparison is a big one.
We all do it. We constantly measure our messy, behind-the-scenes reality against everybody else's polished highlight reel.
Right.
But from what I understand about the evolutionary biology behind this, comparison wasn't originally designed to make us miserable.
Not at all.
It actually started as a highly functional survival tool, didn't it?
It did. The context of our evolution changes everything about how we view this behavior.
How so?
Well, the human brain evolved in small, tight-knit nomadic tribes. In those ancient hunter-gatherer communities, understanding the social standing wasn't a matter of ego or vanity.
Right, it wasn't about looking cool.
No, it was literally a matter of life and death. You needed to acutely understand where you fit into the social hierarchy to ensure you had access to the communal food supply.
Which makes sense.
And physical protection from predators, access to mates. If you unwittingly breached the social expectations of the group, you risked exile.
And exile back then was basically a death sentence.
Exactly. In the ancestral environment, exile meant certain death by starvation or predation. So your brain developed this highly sensitive, always-on radar for social comparison, strictly to keep you safely embedded within the tribe.
So the radar itself isn't broken.
Not at all.
The hardware is doing exactly what it was programmed to do. It's the environment we're forcing that hardware to scan that has completely changed.
Precisely.
Because we aren't just comparing ourselves to the 50 people in our immediate physical vicinity anymore.
Right. We've taken a localized survival mechanism and plugged it into a globalized infinite amplifier.
Oh, man. The algorithm.
Yeah. The algorithms governing the digital platforms on our phones are feeding us a never-ending, carefully crafted stream of the absolute extremes of human success.
The best of the best.
Right. The peak physical beauty, the unbelievable material wealth. You are no longer comparing your humping skills to the guy in the next tent.
Yeah, you're comparing your entirely average Tuesday morning to these digitally altered, highly curated moments.
From the top 0.1% of the global population.
It's wild when you put it like that.
And when your ancient brain is forced to make these wildly unfair upward comparisons against billionaires and supermodels and teenage prodigies, it cannot contextualize the illusion.
It just thinks you're losing.
Exactly. It simply registers a massive drop in your social status. And this creates deep psychological toxicity.
Which plays out in some pretty ugly ways, I imagine.
It inevitably leads to one of two outcomes. Either intense self-loathing, where you turn that feeling of inadequacy inward,
Which is exhausting.
or outward bitterness, where you become hostile. You might turn into a keyboard warrior, desperately trying to drag others down just to level the playing field.
Yeah, that dynamic is brutal enough online, but it doesn't just stay on the internet, does it?
Unfortunately, no.
This comparative toxicity bleeds right into our physical close relationships. There's a specific phenomenon in the observations we are analyzing that honestly hit me like a ton of bricks.
The jealousy aspect.
Yes, it's this idea that a close friend's sudden success can sometimes feel completely unendurable. It breeds this secret, shameful jealousy.
Right.
Suddenly, you find yourself avoiding them. You're dodging their calls or, making excuses not to celebrate their promotion.
Because their victory feels like a blinding spotlight shining directly onto your own perceived failures.
Exactly. It's awful, but it's so real.
It's an uncomfortable truth that so many people carry immense shame about. Comparison poisons our deepest connections.
It really does.
When your baseline sense of self-worth is inherently tied to feeling superior or at least strictly equal to the people in your inner circle, their sudden elevation becomes a literal psychological threat to your identity.
Wow, a threat to your identity.
Yeah. You start viewing the concept of success as a zero-sum game. The subconscious logic dictates that if there's a limited pie of happiness and achievement in the universe, and your friend just took a massive slice,
There's less for me.
right, there's now less available for you. If they're winning, you must be losing.
And that threat response forces people into a really damaging behavioral pattern within their friend groups. They start trying to just fit in to keep the peace, carefully managing the egos around them.
Yes, the fitting in versus belonging dynamic.
Right. And there's a massive psychological distinction here that we really need to clarify. What is the actual difference between fitting in and true belonging?
Because they sound similar.
Yeah, they sound identical, but they operate completely differently.
The mechanics of the two are entirely opposed. Fitting in requires you to actively assess the temperature of the room and then mold yourself to match it.
It's performance.
Exactly. It is entirely conditional.
Yeah.
You have to actively shrink yourself, hide your true nature, maybe minimize your own successes.
Or quietly endure hidden contempt just to maintain your tolerated status within the group.
Right. You exist in a state of constant hypervigilance. You're constantly monitoring yourself, asking, am I being too much right now? Am I too loud?
Should I hide the fact that I just got a massive raise so I don't trigger their insecurities?
Precisely. Now, belonging, conversely, is the profound experience of being accepted exactly as you are without conditions.
That sounds so much more relaxing.
It is. True friendship does not require you to act as the permanent emotional caretaker for someone else's fragile ego.
Wow.
When you choose to stay in conditional relationships, where you have to actively make yourself smaller just to be loved, you are doing catastrophic long-term damage to your psychological health.
But wait, I have to challenge the practical application of this.
Go for it.
If this hyper-vigilant comparison is completely hardwired into our evolutionary biology, like you just explained, then telling someone to just stop comparing yourself to others is completely useless advice.
I agree completely.
It's like trying to tell yourself not to blink. I mean, you might be able to hold your eyes open through sheer willpower for a minute, but eventually biology is going to win.
Biology always wins.
Right. And comparing yourself to these extreme online successes, it feels like trying to learn how to jog by putting yourself on a track and racing an Olympic sprinter.
That is a brilliant way to look at it.
You aren't going to suddenly feel inspired by their speed. You're just going to pull a hamstring, feel terrible about your own physical inadequacy, and quit running altogether.
The Olympic sprinter analogy perfectly illustrates the flaw in how we currently utilize comparison.
So what's the alternative?
You cannot simply command the amygdala and the ancient parts of your brain to stop scanning the environment. That hardware is permanently installed.
Right.
But what you can do is actively choose the conscious framework you apply to the data your brain collects. You can redirect that hardwired mechanism to make comparison constructive rather than destructive.
Okay, so how do we do that?
There are essentially 3 fundamental rules for doing this. The first rule is to decouple the trait from the person.
Decouple the trait. What does that mean?
It means you focus on a specific skill, not the entirety of their human existence. If someone is an incredible public speaker, allow yourself to admire their vocal pacing or study their confident body language.
Right. Take the parts you can learn from.
Exactly. Do not globalize their specific skill into the devastating conclusion of they are a fundamentally better, more valuable human being than I am.
Oh, that's huge. So you keep the comparison highly tactical and isolated to the specific metric you want to improve. That prevents the ego from taking a total hit.
Exactly.
If rule 1 is isolation, what is the second rule?
The second rule requires a fundamental shift in your core philosophy. You must adopt a growth mindset.
Okay, the growth mindset.
You have to truly, deeply believe that applied effort equals eventual improvement. If you operate with a fixed mindset, the belief that people are simply born lucky, wealthy, or genetically talented, and your lot in life is permanent, then any upward comparison will only ever breed deep resentment.
Because what's the point of trying?
Yeah, exactly. It just leads to despair.
Yep.
But if you can begin to view their success not as magic, but as the visible result of a long, invisible process of effort that you can potentially learn from, the comparison suddenly transforms.
It goes from being a weapon into a roadmap.
Perfectly said.
And the third rule.
The third rule is the absolute bedrock of psychological stability.
Yeah.
You must keep your intrinsic self-worth completely off the negotiation table.
Completely off the table.
Yes. Your performance at work, your conversational skills, your current financial status, your physical fitness, those are all variable metrics.
Right, they fluctuate.
They are workable. They can be measured, compared, and improved over time. But your fundamental worthiness as a living, breathing human being is an absolute constant.
I love that.
It cannot be quantified, and it cannot be measured against someone else's variable metrics.
Yeah.
And returning to your point about the Olympic sprinter, you have to engineer your environment to target your comparisons carefully.
So aim lower.
Aim closer. You must actively look for someone who is only a few tangible steps ahead of you.
Right.
If you are learning to paint, you study the techniques of an artist who's been taking classes for 3 years. You do not compare your first canvas to a masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci.
Because that's just self-sabotage.
Right. You compare yourself to the achievable, adjacent, possible.
That localized comparison makes so much more sense. Because the sheer exhaustion of constantly scanning the global environment, of constantly comparing ourselves to billionaires, and then shrinking ourselves just to fit in with our immediate peers, it drains our cognitive resources completely.
It leaves you with nothing left.
Right. And that massive cognitive toll ultimately manifests as intense social anxiety when we actually have to leave our houses and interact with human beings face to face.
Which is the real world.
Exactly. Which is the perfect bridge into our next phase of the exploration. The intense, visceral discomfort of the social spotlight.
The anxiety is the natural consequence of everything we just discussed. When we feel chronically out of place, or when our baseline self-worth is heavily bruised from hours of destructive digital comparison, stepping into a physical social setting feels like walking into a literal minefield.
It really does.
Your brain is convinced that every person in that room is a potential threat to your already fragile social standing.
It's such a recognizable, almost universal feeling. The observations detail this concept of covert avoidance, and reading about it was painfully accurate.
Oh, covert avoidance is everywhere.
Right. You finally force yourself to go to a networking event or a friend's party, and within 5 minutes, you feel entirely awkward and out of place.
So what do you do?
Well, the default reaction. You pull out your smartphone and pretend to be deeply engrossed in an urgent text message.
It's a classic move.
Or you retreat to the bathroom and hide in a stall for 10 minutes just to regulate your breathing. Or you just hover quietly on the absolute outer fringes of a conversation circle, desperately hoping that someone else will notice you and do all the heavy conversational lifting to include you in the group.
The tragic irony of covert avoidance is that the exact mechanisms we deploy to protect ourselves from the pain of rejection are the very behaviors that practically guarantee we will be isolated.
How does that work?
Well, think about it. If you're standing in the corner staring intensely at your phone, you're heavily projecting a universal signal of disinterest. You visually communicate that you do not want to be bothered.
Right, like leave me alone.
Exactly. Other people in that room, who, by the way, are likely also feeling a significant degree of their own social insecurity, will naturally read your closed-off body language and decide to politely give you space.
Because they don't want to intrude.
Right. They think they are doing you a favor. And then, trapped in your own anxious narrative, you interpret their polite distance as active, hostile rejection.
You think, see, nobody here wants to talk to me.
Exactly. It's a completely self-contained, self-fulfilling prophecy of loneliness.
And that entire paranoid narrative is driven by this massive cognitive bias known as the spotlight effect.
Yes.
We walk into a room and our ego falsely convinces us that every single person has stopped what they are doing to scrutinize our every move.
Like the music stopped and everyone stared.
Yeah. We're convinced they are silently judging our new haircut, analyzing our stiff posture, or mocking the awkward way we are holding our drink.
The spotlight effect requires us to confront a very uncomfortable question about our own egos. Why do we genuinely believe we are that important to strangers?
That's a fair point.
Because we are the undisputed center of our own individual universe. Our brains naturally but falsely assume we must also be the focal point of everyone else's universe.
We just project it outwards.
Right. But the incredibly liberating, almost humorous truth of the matter is that everyone else is completely, entirely consumed with their own internal monologues and insecurities.
They don't care about your haircut.
No, they are not judging your haircut. They are agonizing over whether their own joke landed poorly 5 minutes ago. They are entirely worried that you were judging them.
It creates this horrible, paralyzing internal feedback loop. You try so incredibly hard not to look awkward, you overthink every single word before you speak it, and as a result of that intense self-monitoring, your brain completely freezes.
You lose access to your natural self.
Yeah. You lose access to your natural personality, and you literally engineer the exact awkward, stilted silence you were terrified of creating.
Exactly.
So the behavioral advice here requires a radical, almost counterintuitive shift in perspective. The advice is to stop waiting for someone else to rescue you. Don't wait to be welcomed. Be the welcomer.
It represents a fundamental pivot from a defensive, risk-avoidant psychological posture to an offensive, approach-oriented posture.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Instead of entering a room quietly asking the anxious question, do I belong here? Will they accept me? You actively change the prompt. You walk in and ask, how can I make the person standing next to me feel like they belong here?
But wait, I have to stop and really examine the mechanics of that, because it sounds great in theory, but impossible in practice.
I hear it a lot.
How on earth can someone who is actively sweating with social anxiety, whose heart is pounding out of their chest, and who can barely remember their own name, suddenly transform into the confident, welcoming committee for a room full of strangers?
It's a leap.
It feels like telling someone who is actively drowning to suddenly become a lifeguard for everyone else in the pool.
It sounds paradoxical, which is why it is so difficult to grasp initially. But it is actually the ultimate psychological hack for dismantling acute social anxiety.
How so?
Think about the mechanics of anxiety. It forces your attention entirely inward. You become intensely, painfully hyper-focused on your own physiological symptoms, your racing heart, your sweating palms, the slight tremor in your voice, your own perceived social flaws.
Yeah, you're trapped in your own body.
Exactly. When you consciously take on the role of the welcomer, you are forcibly redirecting your cognitive focus outward. You cannot simultaneously obsess over your own internal state while genuinely focusing on the comfort of someone else.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I was thinking about this dynamic and I came up with an analogy.
Let's hear it.
It's exactly like being handed a high-powered flashlight while standing in a pitch-black room.
All right.
If you take that flashlight and shine the beam directly onto your own face, you are completely blinded by the glare. All you can see is yourself, and you become highly self-conscious of every single flaw or blemish illuminated in that harsh light.
That's a great visual.
You can't see the room, you can't see the furniture, you are just blinded by your own reflection. But if you simply turn the wrist and shine that flashlight outward to illuminate the path for the other people stumbling around in the dark, you suddenly forget all about your own face.
Yes.
You can navigate the room clearly, you can see where you're going, and most importantly, you are actively helping other people feel safe.
The flashlight analogy captures the exact neurological shift perfectly. When you shine the light on others, you are engaging a part of your brain called the reticular activating system.
The RAS.
Yes. You're participating in what researchers call searching for what you want to find. The human brain is a highly efficient, highly biased scanning machine.
Highly biased, okay.
If you walk into a social gathering and subconsciously program your brain to scan for threats, if you are actively scanning the room for people looking at you funny or scanning for subtle signs of rejection, your brain will absolutely find them.
Even if they aren't there.
Even if it has to invent them. It will misinterpret a neutral, tired glance from a stranger across the room as a hostile, judgmental glare.
Wow.
But if you actively and consciously program your brain to search for connection, for warmth, for shared humanity, your brain will filter the environment to find that instead.
And the beautiful thing about searching for that connection is that it doesn't have to mean diving into a deep philosophical discussion about the meaning of life right out of the gate. We put so much pressure on ourselves to be captivating.
The pressure to be captivating is entirely misplaced. Genuine connection almost always begins with the deeply mundane.
Like what?
It is the shared human experience of complaining about the terrible traffic on the highway, or commenting on the unusual weather, or discovering you both happen to drink the same obscure brand of sparkling water.
Just normal stuff.
Exactly. These small, seemingly superficial micro-interactions serve a vital purpose. They break the initial tension and create conversational momentum.
Right.
When you are the welcomer, your only goal is to make the other person feel fascinating and entirely safe in your presence. You do not need a clever script.
That's good to know.
You do not need to be the smartest person in the room. You just need genuine, outward-facing curiosity. People will very rarely remember the exact words you used in a conversation, but they will forever remember the way your presence made them feel.
That is such a massive relief. You don't need to be witty, you don't need to have a perfect joke queued up, and you don't need an impressive resume. You just need to be genuinely interested in the human being standing in front of you.
That's all it takes.
But, and this is a big but, if we follow the logic of this outward focus, we hit a very real wall.
We do.
Pouring all of this energy into managing your social interactions, taming your internal comparison monster, and constantly shining that flashlight outward to make other people feel comfortable, it can leave a person running completely on empty.
Oh, absolutely.
You give and you adjust and you accommodate, and suddenly your own internal tank is bone dry. If we don't address how to survive that depletion, this whole strategy falls apart. We need to examine how we actually refuel ourselves.
That depletion is the inevitable consequence of output without input. We must talk about self-care.
Yes.
But we have to discard the superficial version of self-care that is aggressively marketed to us on television and social media. We need to fundamentally redefine the entire concept from the ground up.
We absolutely do, because I think we have completely commercialized and ruined the true concept of self-care.
Right.
We treat it as a consumption-based myth. We're explicitly told by marketing campaigns that self-care is buying a $300 face cream.
Or booking a luxury spa weekend.
Yeah, that we can't afford. Or escaping our lives by flying to a tropical island. And sure, those things provide a nice dopamine hit, but they cost money, and more importantly, they're just temporary escapes. You always have to come back to the life you were running away from.
The profound reality of true psychological self-care is that it has absolutely nothing to do with spending money or escaping your life.
What is it then?
True self-care is about taking absolute, uncompromising personal responsibility for your own baseline well-being. It is the daily, highly repetitive, and often incredibly unglamorous maintenance of your own existence.
Unglamorous is the word.
It is creating a life that you do not constantly need to use vacations and purchases to escape from.
The concepts we are analyzing use a really beautiful grounding metaphor for this maintenance. They describe your life and your well-being as a garden.
I love the garden metaphor.
You are a living plant deeply rooted inside this garden, and you desperately need to be watered, pruned, fertilized, and protected from the elements in order to flourish. The brutal truth is, You cannot sit there wilting in the sun, waiting for someone else to wander by and decide to tend to you.
No one is coming to do it for you.
Exactly. If you do not proactively water yourself, you will wither.
And that essential garden maintenance is structurally broken down into 4 distinct, non-negotiable pillars: the physical, the emotional, the social, and the spiritual.
Let's break those down.
If we look at physical self-care, it is vastly different from the punitive diet and exercise culture we're used to. It isn't just about forcing yourself to go to the gym to achieve a specific aesthetic to impress others.
Right.
It is about showing radical compassion to your biological vessel. It is having the discipline to go to sleep when you are exhausted instead of watching another hour of television.
Oh, that's a hard one.
It is choosing to eat food that actually fuels your cellular energy rather than just numbing your stress. And crucially, it involves changing the way you speak about your own physical form.
If the physical pillar is about the biological vessel, how do we tend to the emotional pillar? Because that feels much harder to quantify.
Emotional self-care is the incredibly difficult willingness to actually sit in silence and listen to your own uncomfortable feelings.
Without running away.
Exactly. Without immediately reaching for your phone, a drink, or a distraction to numb them. It is allowing yourself to feel grief, anger, or sadness without judging yourself for having those emotions.
That takes practice.
Then we move to social self-care, which we touched on with the flashlight analogy.
Sure.
But internally, social self-care is heavily defined by establishing healthy boundaries.
Boundaries are so tricky.
It is having the immense courage to actively distance yourself from deeply destructive, one-sided relationships that are draining your soil of its nutrients.
Pulling the weeds, basically.
Yeah. Yes. And finally, spiritual self-care, which functions entirely independently of specific religious beliefs, is about connecting your daily actions to a sense of purpose and meaning that is larger than your own immediate gratification.
Let's zoom in on that social pillar for a second, specifically the mechanics of setting boundaries. Because saying no to people is notoriously incredibly difficult for most of us.
It's the hardest part for a lot of people.
Why do we feel such an intense, almost physical need to say yes to everyone else's demands, even when we know it is actively harming our own garden?
The psychology behind chronic people-pleasing is fascinating and often deeply misunderstood. For many people, the inability to say no is not about being a nice person. It is actually a deeply ingrained trauma response.
A trauma response?
Yes, it usually stems from profound fears of abandonment that were conditioned very early in life.
How does that start?
A child might learn that if they are perpetually useful, if they never cause trouble, if they suppress their own needs, and if they always say yes, their caregivers or peers will keep them around. They equate utility with love.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
So fast forward to adulthood. When you finally try to assert a boundary and say no to a demanding friend or a manager, it doesn't just feel socially impolite. Your amygdala registers that no as an existential threat.
It thinks you're going to die.
It triggers a massive physiological panic response because your deep subconscious equates saying no with being rejected, abandoned, and left to die alone.
The absurdity of how we treat ourselves really comes into focus when you compare it to our technology.
Oh, absolutely.
We treat our digital devices with infinitely more respect and care than our own biological bodies. Think about it. We treat our smartphones with immense hypervigilant care.
We never let them die.
Never. The second that little battery icon in the corner of the screen turns red and hits 10%, we experience genuine panic. We will drop whatever we're doing, interrupt conversations, and frantically search the room to find a charger.
It's a real emergency.
But when it comes to ourselves, we let our own mental, emotional, and physical battery hit absolute zero. We completely drain the tank, and then, while running on zero, we still demand absolutely perfect, high-level performance from ourselves. We literally yell at ourselves internally for having the audacity to be tired.
It's a striking, tragic contradiction in modern behavior. Yeah. We respect the limits of a lithium-ion battery, but we deny the biological limits of the human nervous system.
Why do you do that?
Well, when you finally attempt to plug yourself in to recharge, when you try to take an afternoon off or say no to a party, you are almost always met with an overwhelming wave of guilt. Society and our own conditioned minds frequently mislabel the act of prioritizing your own rest as being inherently selfish.
Right, you're being lazy.
But the unassailable logical reality is this. If you are continually running on empty, you practically guarantee that you have absolutely nothing of value, no patience, no creativity, and no empathy to offer anyone else. The old adage is entirely scientifically accurate. You cannot pour water from an empty cup.
But I want to push back on the practical reality of implementing this advice. Setting boundaries feels terrifying in real time.
It does.
What happens when the people around you react poorly? What if you finally say no to a demanding friend? Or you tell your boss you cannot work on Saturday and they get genuinely angry, disappointed, or upset with you? How do you survive that social friction?
You have to mentally prepare for the fact that the friction is an unavoidable requirement of growth. When you change the rules of engagement, the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries will naturally resist the change.
That makes sense. They're losing their free ride.
Exactly. But you have to reach a point of internal maturity where you fear your own profound self-disapproval more than you fear the temporary disapproval of others.
Oh, wow.
Think about the alternative. If you say yes to them out of fear, but you deeply fundamentally betray your own needs in the process, the resulting internal resentment will eventually poison and destroy that relationship anyway. You are simply choosing between short-term discomfort and long-term destruction.
So how do we actually start this process of tending the garden? Before we can even set the boundary, how do we figure out what it is we actually need in the first place? Because many of us are so disconnected from ourselves, we don't even know what the battery level is.
Reconnecting requires a very specific, deliberate, and regular visualization practice. You have to forcibly interrupt your momentum throughout the day.
Tip, pause.
You stop, you close your eyes for a moment, you scan your physical body, and you ask yourself a very direct, uncompromising question. What do I actually need right now?
And it has to be honest.
You have to filter out the noise, not what do others expect of me, not what does my schedule say I should be doing, but biologically and emotionally, what do I need? Is it a glass of water? Is it 10 minutes of absolute silence away from screens?
Right.
Is it the courage to cancel a dinner plan because you're running on fumes and your body needs sleep? You have to become fluent in the language of your own physical cues.
That sounds simple in theory, but I know from personal experience that the biggest barrier to this kind of self-care isn't even the risk of other people getting mad at us.
What is it then?
The ultimate boss-level barrier is the voice inside our own heads. It's that relentless internal monologue that immediately chimes in, telling us we haven't worked hard enough today to deserve the rest, or that we are being lazy, or that taking a break will lead to total failure.
The inner critic.
Yes. Which brings us perfectly to the core of the psychological battlefield, taming the inner critic and surviving acute overwhelm.
The inner critic is perhaps the most misunderstood and mismanaged psychological mechanism we possess. We have been culturally conditioned to mistakenly believe that we have to protect and empower this harsh, abusive internal voice.
We absolutely do. We secretly believe that if we don't have this brutal, relentless drill sergeant screaming at us in our heads, we will just completely let ourselves go.
Right, like we just stay in bed forever.
We are convinced that the inner bully is the only structural support standing between us and total, catastrophic, lazy failure. We think we need the abuse to achieve.
But the psychological data shows exactly the opposite. Chronic self-flagellation does not motivate you. It paralyzes you.
Really? Paralyzes?
Yes. Beating yourself up triggers the exact same stress response as being physically attacked, draining the very energy you need to take action. The inner critic maintains its power over you by operating through severe cognitive distortions. It does not deal in reality.
Because it twists things.
It takes neutral reality and warps it into something terrifying and insurmountable.
The psychological analysis mentions a few specific distortions that are incredibly common. Let's walk through the mechanics of them, starting with overgeneralizing. How does this actually play out in a normal day?
Overgeneralizing is the cognitive error, where you take one single isolated negative event and illogically apply it as a universal law to your entire existence.
Give me an example.
For example, you wake up and burn the toast in the morning, or you send an important email with a glaring typo. Instead of recognizing it as a brief moment of clumsiness, your inner critic instantly declares, "Today is completely ruined, I can never do anything right, and by the way, I am fundamentally terrible at my job."
Oh, man.
One minor negative data point is weaponized to predict a lifetime of negative outcomes.
And then there's the distortion of catastrophizing, which I think is where anxiety really takes the wheel.
Catastrophizing is the brain's tendency to bypass all logical intermediate steps and jump straight to the absolute worst-case scenario imaginable. It is an extreme failure of perspective.
Jumping to conclusions on steroids.
Exactly. You feel a slight, unexplained pain in your side, and your brain instantly decides it's a terminal illness. Or your manager sends a vague message asking to see you in their office at 3 o'clock.
Oh, that's the worst.
Instead of assuming they want an update on a project, Your inner critic immediately assumes you are being fired, which means you will be evicted, and you will inevitably end up destitute. The brain acts as if the worst-case scenario is already happening.
And the third distortion, which I think is the sneakiest and hardest to catch in real time, is emotional reasoning.
Emotional reasoning is deeply deceptive because it uses your own biology against you. It is the false, flawed belief that your transient emotional states dictate objective reality.
How does that sound internally?
The internal logic goes like this.
Ah,
Because I feel entirely inadequate and stupid right now, it must be a factual reality that I am inadequate and stupid. We completely forget that emotions are just temporary bodily sensations heavily influenced by sleep, blood sugar, and stress hormones.
right. They aren't facts.
They are not objective, permanent truths about our character or capabilities.
When all of these distortions pile up and attack you simultaneously, when you're overgeneralizing your mistakes, catastrophizing the future, and using emotional reasoning to validate the panic all at once, that is when acute overwhelm completely takes over.
It's a perfect storm.
And overwhelm isn't just a bad mood or a mental state. It is an intensely physical, whole-body takeover.
It is a profound physiological event. When the brain senses a threat, and it does not differentiate between a physical predator in the woods and an overflowing, chaotic email inbox, it triggers the ancient fight-or-flight response.
So your body thinks you're being hunted.
Yes, it dumps massive amounts of adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream, causing a rapid cascade of physical tension. Your jaw tightly clenches, your breathing becomes incredibly shallow and rapid, your heart rate spikes, and your digestive system essentially shuts down.
All for an email.
Your brain is desperately chemically trying to protect you by preparing your body to physically fight a predator that does not actually exist in the physical room with you.
So when we are drowning in that chemical cocktail, how do we dismantle the attack? How do we honestly evaluate our mistakes or our performance without triggering a full-blown meltdown?
The vital difference, the absolute key to surviving your own ambition, lies in separating action evaluation from character evaluation.
What's the difference?
It is incredibly productive and necessary for growth to look at a situation objectively and say, that specific technique I used failed. My presentation was sloppy, and I need to try a completely different approach next time. That is action evaluation. It focuses strictly on the behavior, which is mutable.
Right, you can fix that.
But it is profoundly, deeply destructive to look at that same failed presentation and say, I am a failure. That is character evaluation. You are taking a local event and using it to attack your core identity. Your core human worth must remain entirely non-negotiable, regardless of the magnitude of your daily mistakes.
I understand that intellectually. It makes logical sense. But let me pose the counter-argument that I know a lot of highly driven people listening are screaming at their speakers right now.
Lay it on me.
If we fire the internal bully, if we stop the harsh character evaluations, who is going to keep us motivated to achieve? Doesn't swapping out the drill sergeant for self-compassion just lead to complacency? Doesn't it lead to sitting on the couch, doing nothing, eating junk food, and giving up on our long-term goals because we are being gentle with ourselves?
That fear represents the grand, pervasive myth of self-compassion. People equate self-compassion with letting themselves off the hook. But true psychological self-compassion is not weak, it is not passive, and it's certainly not about indulgent self-pity or lowering your standards.
I was thinking about this dynamic, and the clearest way I can understand it is through the analogy of coaching.
Let's explore that.
Think about how you would treat a child who is trying to learn an incredibly difficult, demanding sport like competitive gymnastics or martial arts. If you genuinely want that child to succeed and reach their highest potential, you hire a tough, highly disciplined, but deeply encouraging coach. You want a coach who pushes them to their absolute limits, who clinically analyzes their poor form, and who demands that they get back up on the mat when they fall down. What you absolutely do not do is hire someone to stand inches from the child's face and scream that they are a worthless, pathetic embarrassment every single time they drop the ball.
Right, that would be abuse.
That wouldn't build a champion, it would just destroy the child's nervous system. If we wouldn't accept that kind of abusive, destructive coaching for a child we care about, why do we passively accept it as the default voice in our own minds?
The coaching analogy is the perfect paradigm shift. You are not abandoning the pursuit of excellence. You are simply swapping the internal bully for an internal coach. The coach still demands excellence. The coach still points out where you failed. But the coach also believes in your fundamental potential to improve.
It's a completely different energy.
We call this framework fierce compassion. It is a stubborn, aggressive, unyielding commitment to having your own back, especially in the dark moments when you fail the hardest and want to quit. Is being your own strongest ally.
And what about the physical reality of the panic? In the exact moment of acute overwhelm, when the cortisol is flooding your system and the physical panic is taking over, you can't just reason with yourself. How do you deploy that coach when you can barely breathe?
You cannot use logic to talk your way out of a physiological response. You have to physically ground the body first before you can even attempt to reason with the mind.
Grounding.
The most effective, scientifically backed real-time tool for this is grounding via the 5 physical senses. You literally interrupt the panic cycle in the brain by forcing your neurological bandwidth to process immediate, tangible physical data.
So get out of your head and into the room.
You consciously bring all of your attention to the physical weight of your feet pressing firmly into the floorboards. You intentionally notice the rough texture of the clothing against your arm. You force yourself to identify 3 distinct sounds you can hear in the room, like the hum of a refrigerator or traffic outside.
And what does that do?
By forcing the brain to process sensory reality, you signal to your central nervous system that in this exact physical moment, in this room, there is no actual predator. You are safe. The cognitive distortions lose their physical fuel.
So if we look at the big picture of where we are in this process, we've grounded our physical bodies, we've fired the abusive internal bully, and we've hired the fierce, compassionate internal coach.
Right.
But here is the stark reality. Once you stop attacking yourself and ground yourself in the present moment, you still have to actually do the hard things. The difficult emails still need to be written and sent. The terrifying high-stakes conversation still needs to happen. How do we find the motivation to initiate that action when our willpower feels completely, utterly depleted?
The reason we struggle so much with taking action is that we operate under a fundamental misunderstanding about how human motivation actually works. We are constantly waiting around for a magical feeling of readiness that is never, ever going to arrive on its own.
This part of the psychological analysis completely flipped my understanding of human behavior. We have this pervasive, almost romanticized myth that confidence is a tangible resource you must find or build before you can start doing something scary.
That's a massive misconception.
We genuinely think we have to read enough books, listen to enough advice, or repeat enough positive affirmations in the mirror until we feel 100% confident, and then finally we will take action. We treat confidence as the prerequisite for moving forward.
And that is completely backwards. Confidence is never a prerequisite for action. It is the delayed byproduct of taking action and surviving the results.
A delayed byproduct.
You do not feel confident before you walk out on stage to give the difficult speech. You feel confident after you give the speech, stumble over a few awkward words, sweat through your shirt, and realize you didn't actually die of embarrassment.
Right.
You build the architecture of confidence strictly by gathering hard, empirical evidence that you are capable of surviving failure and discomfort.
And what about the concept of willpower? Because we treat willpower like it's a moral virtue, like it's a personality trait. We assume that highly successful people just possess a magical, infinite reserve of willpower, and the rest of us who struggle are just inherently weak or lazy.
Willpower is not a moral virtue. It is simply the psychological friction that exists between a state of rest and a state of doing.
Friction.
If we look at the basic laws of physics, an object at rest strongly desires to stay at rest. It takes a massive, disproportionate surge of energy to overcome inertia and initiate that first movement. The friction is highest right at the beginning. But once physical momentum is achieved, the required willpower drops to almost zero. The hardest part of the entire endeavor is simply crossing the threshold of starting.
That concept also completely reframes the experience of imposter syndrome. We usually view the feeling of being a fraud as a massive red flag. We think the anxiety is objective proof that we are incompetent, that we tricked everyone, and that we shouldn't be allowed in the room. But the mechanics we are studying suggest that imposter syndrome is actually empirical proof of the exact opposite.
It is biological proof that you are actively stretching your limits.
Yeah.
If you never, ever feel like an imposter, it simply means you are never challenging yourself. You are just staying perfectly safe inside the stagnant borders of your comfort zone.
If we connect this understanding of friction and momentum to the bigger picture of actually achieving our goals, we have to look at how we pragmatically prepare for that friction. Relying on raw willpower in the heat of the moment is a losing strategy.
Very much so.
True willpower isn't just violently gritting your teeth in the face of temptation. It involves deploying a highly effective psychological strategy called predicting failure, which is a technique heavily utilized in clinical relapse prevention.
Yes, predicting failure is key.
How does predicting failure actually work for someone just trying to get through a normal, challenging week?
Predicting failure means you practically, ruthlessly anticipate every single logical excuse your brain is going to invent tomorrow to justify quitting your goal. And you create a physical or logistical roadblock for that exact excuse today.
So, outsmarting yourself.
For example, if you know you desperately want to exercise in the morning, but you also know with absolute certainty that your 6 a.m. self is going to wake up, feel cold, and say, I can't find my running shoes, I'll just sleep.
Guilty.
Your 8 p.m. self from the night before needs to preemptively solve that problem. Your evening self needs to lay the clothes out on the floor and put the shoes directly blocking the bedroom door. You have to actively engineer your physical environment so that executing the right behavior requires significantly less friction than executing the lazy behavior.
We consistently fail to do that because of this strange, almost delusional psychological disconnect from our own future self. We treat our future self like they are a completely different, vaguely familiar stranger. We make highly impulsive, comfortable choices today, eating the junk food, spending the money on impulse buys, procrastinating on the massive project, and we falsely, wildly believe that our future self will somehow wake up tomorrow possessing superhuman strength, boundless energy, and infinite patience to handle the consequences of our mess.
We really do.
We essentially throw our future self under the bus every single day to buy ourselves an hour of comfort.
To combat that deeply ingrained habit, you have to mentally close the empathy gap. You have to force yourself to realize viscerally that the exhausted, stressed-out person dealing with tomorrow's overflowing inbox and tight deadlines is still undeniably you.
It's still you.
When you begin to make your daily decisions out of a profound sense of fierce compassion for your future self, the concept of willpower transforms. It ceases to be an act of harsh self-punishment and becomes a profound act of self-care. You are doing a favor for the person you will become tomorrow.
I love the analogy that emerges from these concepts regarding friction. It suggests that willpower and ambition are exactly like the aerodynamics of an airplane.
An airplane, okay.
An airplane has to accelerate and take off directly against the headwind, not with it. Aerodynamic friction is an absolute non-negotiable requirement for flight. Without the heavy resistance of the air pushing violently against the wings, you cannot generate the lift required to leave the ground.
That's fascinating.
So when you feel that massive resistance in your life, when the friction is high and the fear is intense, it doesn't mean you are failing or moving in the wrong direction. It means you have generated enough speed to finally take off.
That is an incredibly powerful, scientifically accurate reframe of resistance.
Yeah.
The headwind is not the enemy. The headwind is the mechanism of elevation.
So let me ask you the ultimate practical question. What does this aerodynamic shift mean for us in the literal physical moment when we are standing on the edge, absolutely terrified of failing, when the physical symptoms of anxiety are screaming at our nervous system to run away and hide?
It requires the ultimate cognitive reframe of those specific physical sensations. When you are standing on that precipice right before you walk into the room, or hit send, or speak up, your palms are sweaty, your heart is racing, your stomach is doing flips.
Classic terror symptoms.
We have been deeply conditioned by society to interpret those exact physiological sensations as our body's warning system saying, danger, this is wrong, run away, you are not ready for this.
Right.
But if you look at the raw biology, the physical sensations of intense, terrifying anxiety and the sensations of intense, exhilarating excitement are completely chemically identical. The body does not know the difference.
So how do we consciously interpret that chemical flood instead of surrendering to panic?
You have to recognize that your body isn't telling you to run away. Your brain is simply flooding your nervous system with high-octane rocket fuel, adrenaline, and cortisol to biologically prepare you to perform at your absolute peak capacity. You have to consciously, forcefully shift your internal narrative. You shift from the mindset of the prey, whose only biological goal is to escape the tension and survive by hiding, to the mindset of the predator, who actively leans into the thrill of the chase. You feel the racing heart, and you tell yourself, out loud if necessary, my body's giving me the exact energy source I need to crush this obstacle. You weaponize the anxiety.
And what happens if you weaponize that anxiety, you take the massive leap and you still fail? What if you take a wrong turn and hit a wall?
Then you must accept the reality of exploration. You realize that hitting dead ends and making wrong turns is the only logical, empirical way to map out the correct path. You cannot draw an accurate map of new territory without bravely exploring the dark corners and discovering where the cliffs are. Every single failure is stripped of its emotional weight and viewed simply as necessary data acquisition.
That is a staggering, life-altering shift in perspective. And as we synthesize all of this, it brings us to a much broader reflection on everything we have explored over the course of this conversation.
It's all connected.
When we finally zoom out from the minutia of our daily anxieties and we look at the grand, sweeping narrative of our lives, the raw capacity of human potential is absolutely breathtaking. But it only truly unlocks when we stop acting as our own worst, most abusive enemy.
The capacity of the human mind is extraordinary. The fact that we have the neuroplastic ability to observe our own thoughts, to recognize our deeply ingrained toxic patterns, and to consciously, deliberately rewire our internal dialogue is a biological marvel.
It really is.
We possess the unique ability to take profound emotional pain, deep social awkwardness, and crushing self-doubt, and instead of letting it destroy us, we can alchemize those exact experiences into deep empathy and genuine, powerful connection with other human beings who are suffering from the same illusions.
Life is undeniably incredibly difficult. It is full of friction. But when we consciously direct our daily effort away from the instinct to hide and shrink ourselves and direct it toward actively contributing to others, all while treating our own minds and bodies with that fierce, unyielding loyalty we talked about, we discover genuine meaning. Your story is not rigidly determined by the missteps you made yesterday or the trauma you inherited. Your identity is in a state of continuous active formation through the specific choices you decide to make, starting right now, today.
If we were to distill the vast complexity of everything we've analyzed into a concrete operational framework, it comes down to a few fundamental shifts in how you operate in the world.
Let's summarize those.
First, you must completely stop aiming to merely fit in by camouflaging yourself, and instead cultivate the immense courage required to demand true belonging exactly as you are.
Second, when you find yourself in highly charged social situations and the familiar panic begins to set in, remember to physically turn the flashlight outward. Stop obsessing over how you appear to the room and make it your singular mission to make the people around you feel incredibly safe and deeply fascinating.
Third, you must treat your physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being with the reverence of a master gardener. It is a delicate ecosystem that demands your daily, unapologetic tending, and you must fiercely, bravely protect its boundaries from those who would drain it.
Fourth, you must immediately fire the internal bully that is paralyzing you with fabricated cognitive distortions and replace it by hiring an internal coach who demands your best but operates strictly from a place of fierce compassion.
And finally, you must abandon the illusion that you need to feel ready. Do not wait for confidence to magically arrive before you begin your life. Act first, lean heavily into the aerodynamic friction of your anxiety, and trust that the confidence will inevitably catch up with you later.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today about facing your deepest fears, managing the chaotic chemistry in your mind, and radically changing the trajectory of your daily life. But consider this one final provocative thought as you step back into your day.
What's that?
What if the exact flaws, the unbearable awkwardness, and the deep secret doubts that you've spent your entire life so desperately trying to hide from the world are actually the very mechanisms that will eventually make you the most relatable, the most deeply trustworthy, and the most powerfully impactful to the people lucky enough to be around you?